Committee amendments and the one holster. The officer will get officers work interest on officers who officers have interest with interest in that and the right interest in item 3 is that lobbying to interest personalities lobbying. So, the next meeting is previously held on the 7th of how to start. Ross goes to the organization now few sleep guests for the what is said with three stars so that's what we'll do this up to one way to lead by your not recommendations thank you, sir. I would like to speak to the not security council. Can I hear so sense of this this was open, but so I just got to the job.
So, yep. I don't know if there's anyone in the YouTube room who can help us. It does seem a bit echoey, doesn't it? But,
Right, I'm just seeing one seat on my screen. So yeah,
is that better for everyone?
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh,
Sorry about that, but I think it's important that everyone can hear and clearly. So. Okay.
but now I see CFO2 is coming on and off while I'm speaking, so we may go echoey. Right, just I'll take it again from the top. The report is to consider 4 applications to add a number of public right-of-ways to the definitive map in the locality of Meaden Vale and the Old Welbeck Colliery. And the routes are shown on the plan. There are 9 in total. We're sort of wrapping around the top of the Old Welbeck Colliery site. So Nottinghamshire County Council, as the Highway Authority, is required by law to process and either accept or reject the definitive map modification order application on the evidence presented and as per the requirements of the legislation. Should the committee accept the recommendation of the report, then there will be a further opportunity during a 6-week deposit for affected parties to formally object to the addition of bridleways and have the evidence more thoroughly examined at a public inquiry. I should say that that's likely to all take quite a while for the public inquiry to come through from PINS, so it won't be soon, I shouldn't think. If the recommendation were turned down today by committee, then the applicant does have the opportunity to appeal to the Secretary of State. So we may find ourselves back in the same position. And I should say at this stage, the authority only needs to be convinced that there is a reasonable case that the bridleways come to exist to proceed to make an order. In other words, the legal bar is set quite low at this stage. There are a number of legal tests to go through to make the order. Under Section 53 of the Wildlife and Countryside Act 1981, the authority has a duty to keep the definitive map and statement under continuous review, and that may be by applications made by members of the public. The applications before the committee today are supported by user evidence of the routes in question, and the use by the public must have been as of right, which can be summarised as without force, without secrecy, and without permission. The landowners, on the other hand, can rebut the user evidence by showing evidence of intention not to dedicate, which usually takes the form of statutory declarations or notices stating that a route is not a public right-of-way, or interruption of use, or locking of gates, and also direct challenge of users. And there are 2 statutory declarations which challenge the use of the routes claimed in this case. The first was made by the Agricultural Development Advisory Service, ADAS, in 1997. It affects routes 5, 6 and 7, and on Appendix A it's hatched in a sort of diagonal lines in the middle of the plan there. And the second statutory declaration was made in 2012 by the Welbeck Estate. It affects routes 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 and 9, and is hatched in a darker colour right across the middle of the plan. And the effect of those statutory declarations will be to provide a cut-off in the user evidence after the dates they were made. There were several routes applied for under 4 applications, and the supporting evidence from people was from different combinations of routes used by different witnesses. So it was decided that you needed to assess that user evidence separately for each route section because there were different numbers of users, and that is why we've got these 9 route sections that we're considering in the report. Some of these are completely new to the definitive map. They're routes 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and part of 6 on the plan. And on the other hand, some of them are now footpaths, and the applications would seek to upgrade them to bridleway, and that's part of route 6 and routes 7, 8 and 9. And also routes 1, 2, 3, 4, part of 5, 8 and 9 are within woodland bordering the Welbeck Colliery on land belonging to the Welbeck Estate, and therefore subject to the Welbeck Estate Statutory Declaration of 2012. And of those, routes 3 and 4, which is a sort of long east-west route across the plan, they consist of a tarmac road, which is the legacy of occupation of the land by the Ministry of Defence during the war and afterwards, but now reverted to the Welbeck Estate. And a part of that route is leased to a business called Phoenix Airsoft, who run a simulated gun combat experience in the vicinity of one of the plantations. And routes 5, 6 and 7 on the old ADAS Gleedthorpe Experimental Farm and are now owned and farmed by Messrs G&R Bacon of Pinxton. And those routes are subject to the ADAS 1997 statutory declaration, so that provides the cut-off for user evidence for those routes. My colleague, Mr Brennan, had carried out a pre-order consultation before we got to this stage with the affected landowners, and written objections have been received from the Welbeck Estate, Phoenix Airsoft, the Robin Hood Way Association, and a Mrs Tideswell, who owns the old Colliery Railway, which Route 6 passes under. The Welbeck objection, to summarise, cites the statutory declaration, also challenge of use by a gamekeeper who has accosted people using the route from time to time, restriction of access by the Ministry of Defence during the period of Ministry of Defence occupation, unreliability of the user evidence, locked gates preventing use, occupation by Phoenix Airsoft at Hatfield Plantation, and interruption of use due to the foot and mouth outbreak in the early 2000s, and positioning of signs indicating that the land is private. The Phoenix Airsoft objection references the signs, fencing and locked gates in their site, and also the problems a bridleway would cause their business, including antisocial behaviour. They also note timing of the application and a number of heavy vehicles using the former Colliery Access Road. The Robin Hood Way Association's objection, to summarise, cites the desirability of keeping the Robin Hood Way route free of cyclists. Also note that they were not consulted by the Ramblers Association before the application was made, and consider that use of bicyclists of the Robin Hood Way footpath would have been illegal as a footpath rights only. And they're also of the view that the claiming of bridleways on footpaths by the Ramblers Association is something they'd like to see ceased on a national basis. And finally, Mrs Tideswell's objection refers to the problems caused by the illegal use of the routes by motorised vehicles and motorbikes and other antisocial behaviour associated. There was some support for the application received, 2 letters, one from the Nottinghamshire Footpath Society, just saying they strongly support the application, and one from the local Sustrans organisation outlining the benefits to cyclists in terms of routes and travel. As officers, we accept that the statutory declarations discount any user evidence after the date they were made, but they don't act backwards. So before that, they don't have an effect. In addition, there is some evidence of the rebuttal of use provided by the Welbeck Estate for periods before the action of the statutory declaration from the gamekeeper, accosting people on the route, and also by the maintenance of signs along the route. But it is considered that the legal test for making an order to add each of the routes applied for has been met. That's in due of the weight of the user evidence that we've received. And that the validity of the user evidence and the evidence against rebutting user evidence could be more fully considered if an order were made, at which point the legal tests are a bit higher, more exacting than the decision today before the committee. So we recommend that a definitive map modification order be made to add all of the routes 1 to 9. And just remind everyone that should the committee accept the recommendation of the report today, then there will be that further opportunity during a 6-week deposit period for affected parties to formally object to the addition of bridleways. And in the event of objections, then there will be an inquiry and the evidence will be more thoroughly examined at that point. So just to say this isn't the end of the road. Okay, thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Tipping, and hopefully everyone heard quite clearly. Now, both the applicant and objectors to the application have submitted a request in advance of the meeting to address the committee in relation to the application. Up to 3 people may speak both in support of and in objection to the application for up to a maximum of 3 minutes each. Speakers will be advised when 1 minute of the available time remains. When the time limit has been reached, the speaker must stop immediately. Speakers may only elaborate on the evidence presented already in relation to the recommendations as set out in the report presented to the committee, and should not introduce any new information beyond that already submitted as part of the application. So, as I say, we have 6 speakers on this item, 3 wishing to object and 3 in support of the application. So, first of all, I'll invite representatives of the objectors to speak, and the first name I have on the list here is Mr. Jeff Wiseman from Phoenix Airsoft. So, Mr. Wiseman, you're with us. So, I'm sure you've been told how to use the microphone.
Yes.
Press the right button, the red light will come on.
Yeah. Got it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Right, everybody. My name is Jeff Wiseman. I'm the owner and director of Phoenix Airsoft Adventure Limited. I have to object to the right of way through our section of the woodland, Gleethorpe Beck Plantation. We run our business, Phoenix Airsoft Adventures, and I've done so for over 14 years in this part of the woodland. We have over 20 volunteers that, if the access for our woodland was granted, would cause health and safety issues to all. Not only that, but it would open up other issues, including trial bikes and quad bikes, which do access the woodland illegally, which over the years have been eradicated by us. The suggestion path area would go straight through our gaming area, putting the public at risk and of serious injury. We gained planning permission from Nottingham County Council and Mansfield District Council to run our business in the area, and as mentioned previously, I've done so for over 14 years. We run war games that have invested highly. We have invested highly in our company, having supporting the military members with PTSD and the likes of Nottingham County Council Social Services. We also do a lot of work with the children in the area, especially Mead and Vale, and do a lot of work with the police. And we've invested highly with helping disenfranchised children from in our area, take them on board, helping us out. And that's it, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well within your 3 minutes, so thank you for that. Our next speaker objecting is Mr. David Canny from Welbeck Estates. So, Mr. Canny, you have up to 3 minutes as well.
Chairman, councillors, I'm David Canny, land agent for the Welbeck Estates. The manner in which the application routes have been divided into 9 different routes is not a sustainable approach to assessing the user evidence in a case of this nature. At very best, it is potentially fatal to the case in support of the order because the individual routes used do not meet the very basic character tests for a public highway of any description. The effect of submitting our statutory declarations under Section 31(6) of the 1980 Act is absolute evidence of a lack of intention to dedicate. Whether such deposits also constitute a bringing into question the public trespass over estate-owned land for the purposes of Section 31 is a matter of fact and evidence which has not properly been addressed or considered within the report. Some user evidence claims to have knowingly circumnavigated lot gates, ignored signage that has been put in place to prevent exactly these circumstances from arising. This amounts to use which is by force and not therefore as of right, thus further failing the user tests. Such a principle must be applied to all use during the period that this took place. Also, the estate has regularly had to replace cut locks, reinstate fencing, dig ditches and block routes using tree trunks. This is further evidence that the use of the application routes has not been as of right. What's more, some evidence appears to have been reused from previous application and does not bear relation to this application. I refer to the examples whereby the evidence makes reference to land owned by the UK Coal Board and bears no relation to this application. This evidence should be struck from the record and cast a shadow over other user evidence submitted. The statutory declaration made by our former gamekeeper is further evidence of a lack of intention to dedicate. This is a signed and solicitor witness legal document and has not been given the appropriate level of consideration or weight that it deserves within the report. Our tenant, Phoenix Airsoft, have occupied their leased area since 2008, prior to our statutory declarations. Our tenant has exclusive occupation of their leased area and have regularly patrolled their boundaries, challenged and engaged with trespassers, installed gates and signage which is often ignored and vandalised. These challenges regularly appear in the evidence submitted in support of the application and therefore contradicts the claim as of right. The Hatfield Plantation, routes 1 and 3, routes 1 to 3 on the plan, was used as a munitions store and was fenced and policed by the War Department over many of the years claimed in the application. Access could not have been gained without breaking and entering, further supporting evidence of access by force. To sum up, we do not believe that the user and character tests for dedication of a public right-of-way of any description have been met. The user evidence is fatally flawed and has been demonstrated to have been by force and not by right, and dismiss any intention of the estate or claim that the estate intended to dedicate a public right-of-way. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Canny. And our final speaker to object to the application is Jenny Fillingham from the Robin Hood Way Association. So, over, the floor is yours.
Thank you. I'm Jenny Fillingham. I'm the secretary of the Robin Hood Way Association. The Robin Hood Way is a long-distance recreational footpath, and we have people coming from as far away as America to walk it. The Robin Hood Way goes from the gatehouse of Nottingham Castle to the ancient oaks of Sherwood Forest. The way takes a meandering route linking historic sites with some of the major tourist attractions north of the River Trent. The way is approximately 105 miles long. The way traverses a mixture of woodland, waterside, urban and agricultural scenery through pleasant and undulating Nottinghamshire countryside. The way uses existing public footpaths and is shown on the Ordnance Survey map. Walkers and cyclists do not mix well. Cyclists cannot be heard approaching from behind. Adequate safe space should be made for both cyclists and walkers. The footpaths which are the subject of the status claim are well-used public rights-of-way by walkers. The Robin Hood Way, which uses Warsop footpaths 36, 37 and 38, was Nottinghamshire's first recreational footpath and was actively supported by the late councillor Malcolm Lee in his capacity as chairman of the Environmental Committee of Nottinghamshire County Council. In fact, the Rights of Way section of Nottinghamshire County Council were heavily involved in the design and maintenance of the route. Since 2011, the Robin Hood Way Association has taken on responsibility for waymarking and surveys of condition, reporting faults to the Rights of Way section of Nottinghamshire County Council as appropriate. The Robin Hood Way is currently well used as a recreational route. The popularity of the route has seen a revival since the COVID lockdown, and if evidence of the growth in sales of the guidebook is to be believed, the use walkers make of these footpaths will grow. It is believed that the conversion of parts of Warsop footpaths 36 and 38 to bridleways will reduce the pleasure of walkers enjoying the Robin Hood Way and walks in this area. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Fillingham. So I now invite supporters to speak, and we have three speakers. First of all, Mr. Stephen Parkhouse from the Ramblers Association. So again, you have up to 3 minutes to address the committee. Yes, Mrs. Fillingham, could you turn your mic off? Thank you. And I'll turn mine off.
This network of bridleways is a vital part of the Sherwood Forest Path for Everyone network. As the report makes clear, this is a carefully assembled application with more than enough evidence. This was gathered over 2 summers by standing on the routes at key points to speak to users. I made a full photographic survey of the route to record where signs were in place and the wear lines caused by public use. The only prohibition signs were the 2011 Phoenix ones along section 4. Near section 5 is a Forest Commission sign advising of forestry work taking place. the sort used when the public are present, and it isn't a prohibition sign. Yes, the Welbeck estate maintains signs in the core of the estate on the north side of the A616, but they didn't do that on the south side. This is a statutory process where decisions should be based on legal evidence submitted, and no really credible evidence has been provided by the objectors. However, as the committee knows from my last appearance, I believe that it's in everyone's interest to discuss alternatives before plunging in to a confrontational legal battle. After the application was lodged, planning permission was granted for the restoration of the Welbeck pit tip, including cycle hire and permissive routes over the hill, where there is a great view of Sherwood Forest. The Welbeck estate own much of the land north of Meaden Vale. Whilst the route 3 and 4 through the wood is really interesting, we're very willing to discuss alternatives across the spoilie. They want to develop, the estate want to develop the wood, so you would think it would be in their interest to find an alternative. Unfortunately, so far they've been unwilling to engage. Making the order would focus their minds on finding alternatives. The application also solves three major problems. The obstruction of footpath 36 across Mr. Bacon's land.
1 minute remaining.
Recognises the access from Meaden Vale that avoids the dangerous bridge on Netherfield Lane. Recognises the bypass route 1 and 2 already in use that avoids the dangerous access to the existing bridleway that meets the A60 on Courtney Hill. The tarmac path along the road is on the other side at the top of a very steep bank, about 3 metres high, that abuts the road. The report doesn't mention footpath 36. The problem, right, the 1994 ADAS submitted a first version of their declaration with a map showing 6 and 7 as a rock, a road used as a public path. The NCC officer pointed out that this should be a footpath through the field. In 1996, ADAS replied that people use the lane, and why would they want to go through the field? Those two documents are powerful evidence that the public were using part 6 of the route.
Right, Mr. Parkhouse, you've reached your 3 minutes.
That's it.
So I have to stop you. So thank you. You stopped anyway. So thank you for that. Our next speaker in support of the application is Sue Jones from the Ramblers Association. So over to you.
Thank you very much. So my name is Sue Jones. I'm a member of the Ramblers and the local Nottinghamshire Local Access Forum. And I just want to say how important the Path for Everyone network is across Sherwood Forest. We have this wonderful network of routes, and it's been used by local walkers, cyclists and horse riders for decades, but even they don't realise the full extent of the network out there, let alone visitors to this very important area of Nottinghamshire. Now, examples of important routes that have recently been added to the definitive map are the bridleway down the side of Centre Parks, and that links Sherwood Pines to Rufford, and the bridleway from Ollerton roundabout to Edmonstowe. Now, both those are examples of routes that have filled in gaps in the network and make active travel more attractive and enjoyable as a result. And I feel there are equally strong arguments for adding the routes we are discussing today to the definitive map. Firstly, we have a health and well-being crisis, and we all know the benefits of exercise, that's been proven. Second, we have a climate crisis, and we want to reduce the reliance on cars. And finally, we want to boost the visitor economy in obviously a sustainable way. So expanding on our active travel network in Nottinghamshire will help all of these issues. The routes are there, they're already being used, and we just need to be able to publicise them so more people can benefit from using them. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And our final speaker is Mr. Dave Backhouse, who's a Sustrans Ranger. So, Mr. Backhouse, please.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Dave Backhouse, the Bassett Law Area Group Coordinator for Sustrans, the National Sustainable Transport Charity. Sustrans created and maintains the National Cycle Network, or NCN, operating with professional staff based regionally, supported by local volunteer groups such as ours, and is currently working to develop paths for everyone. I am also a member of the Nottinghamshire Local Access Forum. In February 2021, when the LAF was consulted about this proposal, I asked the opinion of the members of my group and learnt that some of them were amongst the cyclists who had occasionally ridden these trails. Our conclusion was that we are all very supportive of this application, particularly since it would not only confirm the legality of cycling along the specified trails, but also open up the opportunity of creating circular rides in the Mead and Vale area in conjunction with the section of nearby NCN Route 6, which links between Nottingham and Worksop. One such ride would run from Shirebrook railway station east via another NCN route 648, then north along Warsop Bridleway 33, and then the claimed routes 8, 4, 3 and 2 to join Sandy Lane, which is also Cuckney Bridleway number 6, and then onwards by minor roads towards Carburton as far as Corunna Lodge, back via Norton Boat 4 to Hazel Gap and along Route 6, finally reaching Route 648 again. A longer ride could be taken by extending this route into Clumber Park and back. Cycling, and in particular mountain biking, has become increasingly popular for its recreational and health benefits, with riders seeking areas where traffic-free trails can be enjoyed by individuals and families alike.
1 minute remaining.
Thank you. Cuckney Hills, as part of the wider Sherwood Forest region, offers the potential to form such an area, benefiting both our communities and the tourism economy at the same time, as has happened in Derbyshire. To achieve this, it is essential that the 9 routes detailed in the application are designated with bridleway status. Maximum benefit to all users would accrue if the trails are provided with waymarking and interpretation boards mentioning the history, geography and flora of features in the area, together with the countryside code, reducing deviation from the lawful routes and promoting tolerance between all users of the trails. Therefore, I ask you to take these issues into account in arriving at your decision today. Thank you, Chair, and members of the committee.
Thank you very much. Right, so before we go into debate and decision, do any committee members require any clarifications on any points raised by the objectors, the supporters and the officers? So, Councillor Owen, this is not the debate as such, it's just clarifications.
Yeah, I would like some clarification. In the report, and this was referred to by Mr. Tipping, it says, and he said, that insufficient evidence had been put forward by the objectors to show that they didn't want people using the footpaths. And yet we've heard from particularly the representative of the Welbeck estate a manner of things that they appear to have done, including being challenged by gamekeepers. I'm just wanting to know for clarification what more should have been done apart from the gamekeeper shooting the trespassers.
Thank you, Councillor Owen. Mr. Tipping, could you help us with that the evidence query, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I think the opinion of officers is that although there is some evidence provided by the Welbeck estate of challenge to use, we could do with more evidence of that if we were to decide at this stage that there was not a good case for making an order, and just reminding everybody that at this stage there only needs to be a reasonable allegation that a bridleway has come into existence for the order to be made, and we've got on most of these routes some 40 or 50 user evidence statements from witnesses saying that they've used the route without force, secrecy or permission, and accepting that there's a discussion to be had regarding the weight of the evidence on both sides. We think that that's the better explored in depth in an inquiry.
Thank you. Hopefully that's some help, Councillor Owen. Good. Any Councillor Smith?
Yeah, just in a similar vein to that, if I may, I always seem to follow Councillor in great minds. I think the report says that, obviously, the Highways Act says that following a period of 20 years uninterrupted public use, and Welbeck representative made reference to how they have been challenging use, and I wondered if they could explain how long they have been challenging use for, please.
So, yes, Mr. Canny, would you like to just answer that, please?
The answer is it's an ongoing problem. It dates back many, many years. We have, as I said, the statutory declaration amongst a legal document in support of that. But this is an ongoing issue for us, almost on a daily basis.
Thank you very much. Is that helpful, Councillor Smith? Any other members wishing for clarification? Councillor Moxon.
Yeah, thank you. Just to clarify something that was said earlier by the representative from Welbeck Estates, did you say that locks on gates had been forcibly opened, as in they'd been forced access to these lands, or they'd just sort of wandered on and then been sort of turfed off by the groundkeepers? Did you say that there was forcible use? I can't.
Yes, that's correct. We have a budget line for replacement padlocks and chains that are regularly cut, particularly in this area, amongst others.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Henshaw.
Yes, thanks, Chair. In relation to the statement from the representative from the Ramblers Association, where he mentioned it's sensible to talk and discuss alternatives before entering any legal battles. Can the representative of the Welbeck Estates or any of the objectors indicate to the committee what discussions they've had with the people that are putting forward the recommendation to support? Thank you.
Thank you. Is that you again, Mr. Canny, or any of the objectors? Right, yes. Well, Mr. Canny first.
Prior to the application being received, we were not aware that any user evidence was being gathered in support of the application.
Thank you. Any other clarifications from members? No. Do any officers wish to ask clarification or points? No. And one of our legal advisor wants to raise a point.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman. Just to recap on a couple of those points before members move to debate, excuse me. The decision that is before committee today is not one as to whether or not a new right-of-way should be created for future use. The decision today is whether or not, based on evidence of earlier and long-standing use by the public, there is a reasonable allegation that such public rights, on the balance of probabilities, already exist. The reference to matters such as the statutory declarations and the destruction of locks are factors to be taken into account when balancing that evidence. We have evidence on one side from users saying they have used it, with some issues, no issues, and so on. That's a wide spectrum of evidence from them. You have evidence from landowners and other objectors saying they have sought to resist some of that use. And again, the exercise today is to look at balancing that to find out how that measures out. Does it constitute, on the balance of probabilities, a reasonable allegation on there? The statutory declarations specifically, they stop the clock. They challenge the use at the moment that they are submitted, but they do not nullify earlier use that may have taken place up to that date. So where you have a history of user before then, that still needs to be considered and taken into account in there, which is, as my client department have done in the report. The report itself acknowledges that the evidence in this case is not all one way, but it is balanced. There is some on either side for and against on this. The evidence that is relevant to this matter is simply that evidence of user. That's the test for rights of way claims. Have the public used the right of way, and is there proof that such use was wholly without lawful foundation on there? That's why the test is one of reasonable allegation for making the order. Making that order does not mean that a right of way is concluded as existing today. What it means is that you have heard evidence which shows that it may, on the balance of probabilities, exist, and then enables a more thorough investigation to be undertaken at a public inquiry, where everybody, for and against, has the opportunity to present their evidence following a notice given to the world at large to speak up. And people who are invested in that procedure are given the opportunity to attend, present evidence, and for an inspector then determine, based on all of that, if they consider that a right of way exists, and that is subject to a significantly higher test than the reasonable allegation one of today. In terms of some of the representations you've heard today about it either being desirable or undesirable for continuing use to be made of those routes, those factors, whilst important to everybody who has spoken about them, are not relevant to whether or not those rights already exist. Those are what I would refer to as stage 2 considerations. Should it be determined by an inspector that the highways do exist, there is then the opportunity to determine what ought best to be done with them. Should they be promoted, signposted, waymarked, and further use facilitated of those? Should they be extinguished because they are redundant and unnecessary? But those considerations all come once it has been determined whether or not that highway exists. I hope that's helpful, Chair.
Thank you. That's a very comprehensive advice and comment there. So we now open the floor up to members for discussion, debate and decision. So we've heard a lot this morning from the applicant and objectors and our legal advisors. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Councillor Owen.
I might as well kick off, Chairman. I find this particularly frustrating, and in fact, I don't know why it isn't simply referred straight away to the Secretary of State, because what we're doing is in effect a waste of time, I have to say, because we appear to have no choice in the matter. We've got to declare a modification and then send it off to the Secretary of State to listen to it all in detail. I mean, I'm inclined, very much so, to vote against the modification, but it will be appealed and go to the Secretary of State anyway. So what's the point? I mean, it's just daft. Talk about bureaucracy, and we are setting a lower standard in terms of legality, a lower bar, I think it was called, a much lower bar than the Secretary of State has. So again, what is the point? I really don't know. Just because somebody has what many would say have trespassed on somebody else's land, they can use that as a means of putting in an application for a modification. And that's, you know, they say some of them, people have produced statements to say they've gone onto this land and not been challenged. Well, gamekeepers can't be in umpteen places at the same time. If locks have been cut off and by somebody and gone through, somebody else coming along where there's no lock will say, well, I've not been challenged. It just seems to me a total nonsense. So I don't think we've got any choice, unfortunately, to recommend modification or to approve modification or whatever it is we're asked to do. But in sending it to the Secretary of State, I would propose an amendment to the recommendation that we ask the Secretary of State to reject the order for modification, because on the evidence that I have heard this morning, that is exactly what should happen. We can't do it. Well, we can, but it'll just be appealed and the Secretary of State will do it anyway. But at least we can take a position and urge the Secretary of State to refuse it. Now, I'm sure that will cause palpitations, my suggestion, amongst the legal people who have already come up with 50 reasons why we can't do that. And by the time other people have spoken, they'll no doubt have 100. But that's what I would like to do.
Thank you, thank you, Councillor Owen. Nothing we do is a waste of time. We're all here for a reason, and the rules and the law of the land is what it is, and everyone has a role to play in that. But I hear what you're saying. I suspect that our legal colleagues might want to offer a bit of advice about your request and suggestion there, and I know as well that Councillor Creamer wishes to come in as well. So I think we'll just get a direct answer from our legal officer, and then we'll have Councillor Creamer. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Councillor Owen, for your comments. I fully understand and appreciate precisely where members are coming from with that view. As some of you may recall, but not all of you may necessarily be aware, during the currency of the Rights of Way Committee, a letter was sent to the Secretaries of State explaining that the statutory procedure under which these matters operate was considered to be unsatisfactory and in need of revision. As Councillor Owen has pointed out, there is a significantly lower bar at this stage than later in the process, and it is conceivably arguable that it might be more efficient all round if the matter was considered by an expert inspector from the outset. Sadly, the very lengthy and antiquated statutory procedure that currently exists requires us to perform this semi-filtering exercise first. I think, as Councillor Lawton then described it, whether we like it or not at this stage. It would certainly be open to the committee, as before, to determine whether they would wish to make representations to the Secretary of State, seeking that this area of law be revised to see if some progress could be made with that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I hope that's some help, Councillor Owen.
It is, Chairman, and I think we should do that. I know it won't do any good, but I am seriously proposing that this committee, depends on what the majority say, obviously, should make recommendations to the inspector to reject the modification.
Okay, thank you. Point noted. Councillor Creamer.
Yeah, just to say on that one, I disagree with Councillor Owen on the recommendation that was put forward, because we're making a number of assumptions on a very low level of legality that this has actually met. This has actually met a low bar in legal terms, and making assumptions as well about trespasses and other things. It's an assumption. If there's a footpath, road, bridleway, whatever, once a road, always a road. So is it trespass or not? Should the gates be there or not? But I will agree the process does look over the top. But the point is as well that if there had been no objections and it had gone through and it goes on deposit, then it would actually become law, if you like. It would actually be implemented that much quicker. The problem, which I totally agree with Councillor Owen, is once there are known objectors, there seems very little point in going through this process because we know it's going to go to a further one. But bringing rights of way issues here, personal opinion, it's still the right thing to do if we know there are no objectors. Yes, there might be some later on once it's deposited, but it does speed the process up. But I totally agree with Councillor Owen. It does need a review in some way or form. And that's the one I would propose, that when known objectors come, it goes straight to Secretary of State.
But rules are rules, and we are in the environment that we're in. Councillor Henshaw and then Councillor Smith.
Thanks, Chair. I don't necessarily agree with Councillor Owen that we need to put a recommendation for the Secretary of State or for any future investigation to reject the proposals. I mean, as far as I can see it, that there's been a reasonable allegation that a right of way exists through the deliberations from the people that represent some of the public that actually have used the sites. My only concern is that if the access and the routes are changed. There's the issue of going through the area where the paintball business is running, because I can see a conflict there in relation to the safety of people walking through the area. So this is where the point on sensible talks and discussions to discuss alternatives comes in, that that particular issue should be looked at and discussed. But the majority of issues to me are that we've got proposed rights of way for people to actually utilise and walk in the countryside, which we're all going to be encouraging for the health and for the well-being of people. So to me, it makes sense that people sit round the table, get together and come up with an alternative where the public are entitled or can then be able to utilise the area for their enjoyment and for the benefit of going out in the countryside. I mean, to me, if landowners lock things off for no other reason that they want to decline access for people, then people, and I don't condone it, will break things down. I mean, years ago in Derbyshire, somebody mentioned Derbyshire, the Kinder Scout area was locked off, and gamekeepers came out and stopped people going. And the Kinder Trespass, a very important event in allowing people to access that land, was undertaken. And the situation now is that public have access to the Kinder Scout area for all sorts of reasons. And I know it's a national park now, but at one of the anniversaries of the Kinder Trespass, the actual Duke of Devonshire, whose ancestors, descendants, were the people that actually wanted to stop the people going on Kinder, said it was the best thing that happened for the benefit of the people and for everybody else. So in my mind, I would go along with the officer's recommendations, and hopefully people will sit around the table and come to some sensible solutions. One, to make sure things are safe, and two, to ensure that the public can gain access to a beautiful part of Nottinghamshire. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Henshaw. So yes, you feel strongly about the discussion and negotiation between the various parties, whether it's at this stage now or if and when it gets to the public inquiry. Talk to each other. Councillor Smith.
Thank you, Chairman. No surprise to the committee, I'm sure, that I agree wholeheartedly with Councillor Owen. Look, I fear if we vote in favour of this recommendation as it sits, what we're basically doing is voting in favour, in my opinion, from listening to the evidence put forward by both parties, is voting in favour of trespassers. You can go where you like, do it for over 20 years or claim you have, and get what you want. The Highways Act says that you need to have done that for a period of 20 years uninterrupted. We've heard from Phoenix Airsoft, they've been on site 14 years, and they have had to, they've got a legal lease for that site, it's theirs, they can operate their business successfully. Their business is getting people out into the outdoors and using it for different reasons, probably attracting a different type of person than would go walking, which is great, and they've had to take action against people trespassing on their site. Before them, we heard, or after them, I think it was, we heard from Welbeck, who have made the same point, and I'm sure they've been doing it for over 14 years with and over 20 years with locks being broke, etc. But if we vote against the recommendation, it goes to the inspector. If we vote for the recommendation, it goes for the inspector without our views. So let's vote for another recommendation that Councillor has put forward, where we can make our views heard, in taking into account what we've heard from both parties, and get to the inspector anyway. But at least our voices will be heard. So I formally second the second recommendation put forward by Councillor Owen, and hopefully my opinions will be incorporated into that, to the letter to the inspector.
Thank you, Councillor Smith. Yes, I'm sure we're about to get some advice from legal. The thought going through my mind is whether, well, we're here from the legal people, but I'm thinking of procedure and what we can and can't do in particular. And I know you're expressing a wish and a desire, but we'll find out whether we can actually do that, if we can or not, and if we can't, what other possible alternatives might be, such as, for example, the very minutes of this meeting where the comments have been over to legal, please.
Thank you, Chair. The phrase I haven't used in my advice so far is one of quasi-judicial, and it is the nature of the decision to be made today is a quasi-judicial one, which means that it must be predicated on the evidence as we see it, and the package then that is referred to the Secretary of State reflects that. So we take what we have seen, we form a view as to whether or not there is a reasonable allegation that those ways exist, and then that package goes to the Secretary of State with a recommendation. That recommendation needs to be based on the evidence, because if it isn't, then a large number of parties are put to trouble engaging in a process on a misguided basis on there. So, if I may, it is important that any representations as to dissatisfaction with this area of law are kept separate from determining these applications themselves today. So they must be tightly compartmentalised. Hope that helps.
Yeah, I think so. Yes, it's a very important point, the quasi-judicial aspect of what we are doing today, whether it's liked or not. Yes, Councillor Henshaw, you want to come back?
I hear what the legal officer said, but would an additional recommendation to express a view to refuse it be in the tone of giving fair and reasonable evidence that then will be considered? I mean, we could put one saying, well, we strongly recommend it, which, the other side of the coin. I don't know. I wouldn't want to add anything else to the evidence that's been presented before us, and that is the package that will be going forward to the Secretary of State if we're mindful to agree with the officer's decision.
Indeed, that is we have the evidence in front of us, and it's the start or potential, if this is approved, it is the start of a long stage of process, and if it goes to the Secretary of State, there will be opportunity for anybody, whether they're councillors or members of the public or landowners or whoever, to make their representations and views known at that stage. Would be my understanding of these situations. Jazz, do you want to?
Yeah. Thank you. Good morning, everybody. If I could just add to some of the advice you've been given. Now, fundamentally, as you've heard, there will be an opportunity for the council as a corporate entity to take a position on evidence that's submitted at that public inquiry. So, as you've heard, the test at that public inquiry is a different test from what you've heard today. So, in keeping with the advice that Stephen's given, fundamentally, it would be prejudging any evidence that may be submitted to turn around and say that the application should be refused, because what will happen once, if you decide to make this order today, is that there will be a formal public inquiry where evidence will be tested under oath. It's up to the council at that stage to determine what view it should be taking on the evidence submitted. We have some evidence today. We don't have evidence under oath. We don't have evidence tested by cross-examination, and we haven't had a formal tribunal procedure here today. So it's for the council to take a position to recommend to refuse today would be to a certain extent prejudging the matter, because we've met the reasonably alleged to subsist test that we need to meet today, but the test that the planning inspector will be considering is a higher bar, and it would be the council will be prejudging that by taking a position on that test today. So my advice to you is it's not appropriate to put a secondary recommendation on directing the council to make submissions without hearing what's going to be submitted in that public inquiry first. Thank you.
Councillor Smith, you want to come back?
Can I just clarify that? And it might just be my slow mind. What is the difference in that recommendation being voted through with, so vote for this plus the secondary recommendation put forward by Councillor Owen and second by myself? What's the difference between that and just simply voting against it? Because if we vote against it, it will go to the inspector, and there's an appeal. It will go to the inspector to say Nottinghamshire County Council voted against that. What is the difference?
The difference is it would be for the appellant to make that appeal first. So that's the difference. Obviously, your advice you're given, you will receive an appeal if you refuse today. That's the advice you've been given. But fundamentally, that step won't need to happen if you vote in favour of the recommendation you received today. Again, it's an understanding that fundamentally the way the legislation works is at this stage and is described in case law, the relevant case, as a preliminary stage and must be considered to be a preliminary stage. Has to be looked at in that context, basically. So I know we've heard we're not satisfied in terms of how the legislation works, but it is designed to be a preliminary stage. So that's the fundamental difference. The appellant still need to file the appeal. If you vote in favour, then they won't need to file that appeal. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come in as well?
Thank you, Chair. We're tag teaming today, it seems. The implications, Chair, are one of cost and reputation implications if we were to refer the matter on an arguably inappropriate basis. So by saying that we reject the application without stating that the evidence itself doesn't support it, and again that has to be a reasonable basis that we form, we leave ourselves open to a number of claims, not only the appeal, but also cost implications, ombudsman scrutiny, if we were to bring the two issues together as one. So the advice that I would give on that one is form a tightly constrained view on exactly what's before us right now. By all means, ensure that it is recorded within the minutes as to how you feel about the decision you're making. But that cannot in itself then feed into the stance taken at a formal statutory public inquiry with the inspectorate on that one. So that's why I would like those two issues kept resolutely separate for the authority.
Thank you. That's helpful. Again, it goes back to the comments made earlier that the very things we're saying today are going to be noted and will have been heard anyway as part of this first stage we're going through at the moment, this complicated stage. Councillor Fielding and then Councillor Camilleri, please.
Thank you, Chair. I can't see that we've got any other course of action other than to vote this through and filter it to go into a further process. But I do have some frustration with the system and the fact that the bar is so low at this stage, and that but that's not part of this process. I think that needs to be tackled in another place.
Thank you, Councillor Fielding. Councillor Camilleri.
Thank you, Chair. Try your civil.
Turn that one off there.
Is that better? Yeah, well, thank you, Chair. It's interesting. I'm a little bit confused. Like Councillor Smith, I get confused easily. But so you're saying if the evidence, if we sat here as quasi-judicial, and we didn't actually agree with what you were putting through, the evidence, we could say, well, we don't really think that's a good idea. We think that there's a point. So we turn it down, because that's what quasi-judicial means. It doesn't mean you put the thing to us, then we have to accept it one way or the other. So what's the point of us being here if that's the case? That's my argument. And I don't want to be difficult, and I don't want to be one way or the other, but I just find it odd. Why not just say, send it out, agree to this, please, sign it all up, and we'll get it off. I'm just a little bit confused, that's all.
No, don't worry about being confused, because it is a very complex arena. The whole the whole nature of such an arena is not going to be necessarily straightforward, nor at times will it appear to be common sense as well, because it's very legalistic, and that's why we have our advisors accordingly. Did you want to come back on that? Or
yeah,
yeah, okay.
It might be helpful. I mean, obviously, we've heard this word reasonably alleged to subsist. That's the test you're supposed to be considering, and it's been described as a low bar. It might help if I explain that in an easier to digest way. The case law effectively says that for the only grounds on which you can say something is reasonably alleged to not subsist is when there's incontrovertible evidence that it doesn't exist. We're not in that situation here, so it's not open for you to determine that there's incontrovertible evidence that the right-of-way doesn't exist. There is an argument. That argument has to be had in the public inquiry if we make that order. So it's understanding that the bar is. I mean, it's to describe it as low is almost an understatement. Unfortunately, there just has to be an argument, and that's the situation we're in, which is why it's not open. Unfortunately, for this committee to, on the evidence presented, to find that there is incontrovertible evidence that right of way doesn't exist. There is an argument, and it needs to be had out in a public inquiry, fortunately.
Thank you. And also, Councillor Camilleri, rather like Councillor Owen and others, asked the question, why are we here? And that's a perfectly understandable question, but the reason we're here is because we are part of a potential process, as explained. And whether that's a good or bad process is down to individuals to decide. Councillor Moxon and then Councillor Henshaw.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I sort of find myself agreeing with Councillor Henshaw, which is unsettling slightly, but
it's very rare.
It's rare, but thank you. But I think it's sort of one thing is clear this morning is that the evidence either side isn't really overly overwhelming. There appears to be evidence on both sides. That there was that they've had unrestricted access to the land, and then there appears to be evidence that there was some restriction, and potentially we don't know who somebody's cut through them, and we don't know whether that was the Ramblers or people with other reasons for wanting to get into the land or whatever. We just don't know that, and all I can say is, thankfully, we are ultimately not the people that's going to have to decide this, because I don't think we've had enough evidence either way to make that sort of decision. So for me, I'm will be voting for it purely on the basis that it is going to go to another level, and there will be more evidence and more chance for both sides to be able to put their argument with evidence and have their say, and that can only be a good thing, because I don't think we've had the evidence to be able to make a decision on whether this right of way is right or not here. So I'll be voting for it.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Moxon. Councillor Henshaw, you wanted to come back?
Yeah, thanks, Chair. I think we've got enough evidence to determine that there was some feasible right of way that's existing now. In saying that, when I would hope that committee would go along with the officer's recommendation, bearing in mind that if you don't value your position on a planning committee, then possibly you need to have a word with your chief whip to get you moved to a committee where there aren't so many complicated decisions that members have to make. It's not an easy task, but we're in here and we throw our political hats to the side, and we look at things based purely and simply on evidence. At the last committee meeting, we had a major debate and we went against officers' recommendations. Now, that's fair and reasonable. At the end of the day, members can make their mind up. But I think in this instance, we'd be doing ourselves a big disservice if we voted against the officer's recommendations, and I think we should vote for the recommendations before us and then let the process take its course. Let the for and the against discuss things, so that when they go to another area, when they're discussing it in a public venue, then there may be some compromise that everybody can be happy with. One, the landowners can be safe in the knowledge that their land's being used effectively and safely, and the people that want to gain access to the land have gained access to another beautiful part of Nottinghamshire for their enjoyment. So I think what we ought to do is vote in favour of the officer's recommendations, and I move that, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Henshaw. Yes, well, we certainly are doing what we are here to do, and that is have a discussion and also get as hopefully as possible as good an understanding as possible as to our role, but also the views of the applicants and the objectors as well, as far as we can at this stage in the process and the procedure. Councillor Adams, you were waving at me. Did you want to speak again?
I did. I haven't spoken at all yet.
Oh,
so...
sorry. Yes.
No, it's all right. I'm over it, Chair. I'll cry myself to sleep later. I just want to make a quick point. Couple of little bits actually. There's someone not so far away from me that has to access their house via a neighbour's driveway, and that access is continual and has been agreement for an extended period of time. Every day that person crosses that driveway to access their house, and in the same way, I view this application in the same manner. If somebody put a padlock on that access to that house, I would expect it to be cut off. But that's not to say that the cutting off of that is also correct either, because there's also a question around ownership of said padlock. I will make a point in a minute. But what I will say is that I think that this going to a public inquiry is an absolute positive step. I think it's the only way, in my opinion, these things should be debated in the first place. Everybody's account should be taken into consideration. Historical references in regards to the war access that you mentioned in the introduction, I feel is also a key party to that. There was mention of previous trespass access to land, which enabled some of the most fantastic walks that many of us enjoy outside of our working life. But I will also absolutely stand here and fight for critical thinkers like Philip Owen, who have made clear and important points about process, diagnosing, tearing apart, looking at the actual nuts and bolts of these things and raising those issues publicly. That is what this committee is for. That's why we're here. And that's why we don't just follow process. Thank you very much.
Probably nothing to add to that, Councillor Adams, but thank you. And it's interesting to hear about your driveway arrangements as well. So thank you for that. Now, I sense that we're probably getting towards a decision. Oh, Councillor Camilleri, you wanted to come back.
Do I get this clear? To be clear, that if we pass this today, will we be seen as agreeing with the recommendations that go forward? Will that be used in the public inquiry that Notts County Council has agreed to it, to these recommendations? You see where I'm coming from, because there are parts of it that I don't agree with, and in another place we might have turned it down. I just want to know, because I don't want that argument being used that it was a majority decision to agree with it, when perhaps it's not a majority decision to agree with it. I mean, I will vote for it today because of the reasons you've given me, but I'm not happy about it.
That's a perfectly understandable and very fair question. So we have touched on it before, but it's the, I hate the P word, the procedure word, and process and all the rest of it. We're going through, but perhaps if you could just reassure Councillor Camilleri, please.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, the recommendations at the foot of this report set out the level of bar that is believed by officers who are preparing that report to have been reached. So if you go with the officer recommendation today, that is what you are agreeing to, and that I believe, by and large, if not completely, refers to it being a reasonable allegation, the existence of most of those ways on there. So that would be all the committee would be endorsing today, is that the existence of those ways is reasonably alleged. Not more than that, just that it's reasonably alleged within there and meets that low bar. Does that assist, Councillor?
Okay, thank you. Yes, and indeed, as Councillor Adams and others have said, that if it goes to public inquiry, that will be an opportunity for even more people to have their say, whether they're for the application or against. So that's something to bear in mind, I would suggest. Councillor Smith, you want, because I'm,
Can I just clarify that? Because if you read the Route 5 bullet point on the recommendations, paragraph 35, page 72, for example, it says, add Route 5 as a bridleway on that basis, that, on the balance of probabilities, it can be assumed to have been dedicated to common law. So what if we back these recommendations, that's what will go to the inspector and it will say, oh yeah, Nottinghamshire County Council think that on the balance of probability, add Route 5 to the map. So I disagree with the point that the legal officer just made there, because that's what the inspector is going to read. So what we're doing now by going to the vote is you're asking us to endorse that on the balance of probability all these routes should be added to the map because there's evidence on the balance of probability that they've been used. And I haven't heard one speaker in this debate today say that, not one. So I think the recommendation should be changed, that County Council recommend that this goes to the inspectorate, because that's where it's going to go anyway. I don't agree with their recommendations. I'm not voting for them.
Okay, fair enough. Do you, you've said it before, but do you want to just clarify that point, or
Thank you, Chair. My slight reluctance a moment ago was because I had a feeling if I brought the page back up, there would be some that didn't say that it was a reasonable allegation. But again, you will notice that within those, it does refer to it being on the balance of probabilities. So at that stage, committee's view is that having the evidence before it today, it is considered merely more likely than not that that right of way subsists. And that is the reference to the very low bar. When it goes to the inspectorate, they will form their own view on the evidence. We will refer it to them saying that the authority has determined that an order should be made in order to test the evidence. And that is all that this stage is about. Is it arguable that these rights of way subsist? And if so, can we pass it over to you in accordance with statutory procedure for you to then form a view as to whether they do or do not subsist within there? But it is only this 51% probability within there that is referred to in that test.
Okay, thank you. Right, colleagues, I think we've had quite a detailed discussion, and we've heard arguments for and against, both from the applicants and the objectors, but also considerable legal advice as well in the arena we're in. So I don't see anyone else wanting to speak. So I think we've. Oh, Councillor Henshaw.
Point of process. There has been moved and seconded a proposal to change the recommendations. Are we saying that through you, Chair, as Chair of this committee, acting on legal advice, then we shall not proceed with that recommendation for the change?
I think that was the advice we were given, and from an input from the legal aspect. So whilst we have all heard the comments and the observations that have been raised by the committee members,
I didn't want the people that moved and seconded the changes to then come back at a later date to say that we'd not followed process. So I accept your ruling, Chair.
Yeah, I think.
Yeah, we should really vote on that. And like I said, the advice is that it's not sustainable to follow that recommendation, but you should really vote on it for completeness. We need to vote on the recommendation to amend proposal to amend the recommendation. But like I said, the advice is it's not sustainable to proceed with that, but you should vote on it.
Right, well, we will take a vote on this then. So shall we get to that point now? Because I don't think there's anyone else wishing to speak. So we're going to take a vote now on the recommendations with the extra part, the extra conditions that have been moved by Councillor Owen and seconded by Councillor Smith. So let's have a show of hands who are in favour of that, please. So that's 1, 2, 3, and those against. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And for the record, there's no abstentions on that. So that motion, that version of the motion has failed. So now we move back to the original recommendations as on the report on page 72. So we need a show of hands now in favour of the recommendations in front of us, please, Sharon. Make that 9 again. And those against? 2, 3. So 9, 3 against, and no abstentions. So thank you. Oh, I'm right with the numbers there, 9-3. And so after a very long and important discussion debate, the recommendations are approved as per the report. But as we have heard several times today, this is a start of it's part of a long process. I don't know how many times I'm going to say that word today. Let's get away from saying that, but that's where we are. That's the situation we're in our role as being in a quasi-judicial situation. And I hope that everybody understands that the position that we're in with this. So thank you, colleagues, for that. We'll have a minute or two for our guests to escape, to leave it. Well, you're welcome to stay if you want to, but I suspect you want to depart. So thank you. Right, okay, colleagues. So thank you for your time. We spent a long time on that, but I think it was important to do so because it's at the end of the day, it's a very well, like any application, but it can be very emotive, and people will have strong views. Right, so we'll go back to a planning application now, as opposed to a rights of way. So this is item 5 on the agenda. It's variation of planning condition for the Bentinck Colliery tip in Kirkby and Ashfield. I'll move the recommendations as set out in the report. Can I have a seconder, please?
A second to reserve the right to speak, Chair.
Thank you very much. And Joel, Mr. Marshall, if you'd like to talk us through this, please.
Thank you. Good morning. So this is the former Bentinck Colliery tip, situated east of the M1 and to the southwest of Kirkby and Ashfield. It is an extensive, elevated former spoil tip. It's been undergoing initial restoration works since 2014, and that involves the importation of inert waste and soils. The site is within the Greenbelt, and it's directly adjacent to a site of special scientific interest, informally known as the Bentinck Void. The site itself is encompassed within a local wildlife site. The access is off Park Lane along the northern boundary. So in 2013, planning permission was granted for the reclamation of this tip and thereafter to develop it for a range of sports and recreational after uses, including an 18-hole golf course, and the layout of all that is shown on this slide. By virtue of planning condition number 3, the initial reclamation works involving the importation of materials and the regrading of the landform, they were required to be complete by March 2019, and that being 5 years from commencement. The objective of that condition was to promote the timely restoration of one of the county's largest and last remaining unrestored colliery spoil tips. To date, reclamation works have progressed along the western parts of the site in phases 1, 2 and 3, and that includes capping and reshaping of the former tailing lagoons. Previous steep sides have been remodelled and a covering of soil has been provided, which is then being seeded to conservation grassland as an interim measure until the after uses such as the golf course, etc. are developed in the future. So the works are nearly complete in those areas, but the works are yet to commence in phases 4, 5 and 6 on the eastern side. The numbers are shown on the slide. The applicant's reason for the delay is related to engineering difficulties associated with the capping and reshaping of the lagoons. And as such, the applicant is now applying to vary condition 3 and is seeking a further 5 years in which to complete the initial restoration works until March 2024. Now, the applicant is counting 5 years from the current deadline of March 2019, and because of the lateness of this planning application, there is in practice only 14 months remaining within the proposed time extension that they are seeking. I'm going to have some photos now, including some aerial imagery that my colleagues captured last week with the drone, which I'm very grateful for. So this is a view looking west, I believe, towards the M1, and then we're going to have a look at phases 1, 2 and 3, where works are coming along, nearly complete. And then we've got, we pan round to the north, and then panning round to the east to look towards the unrestored areas. And we can see now some of the unrestored areas there in phase 6 in particular, which is the large lake there in the middle. So we've got unrestored areas there in phases 6, and then there are areas in phases 4 and 5 which were subject to historic earlier restoration, and so they have a covering of grass over parts of those areas. That's phase 4. So it's a big site, as you can see. We've got some before and after shots just to give a flavour of what work has been undertaken. That is a view of phase 1, I believe, before the restoration works commenced, and one of the old lagoons in an unrestored state, and then moving towards a summer view now. Obviously it's not summer, but that was the work that was done to reshape that lagoon and to vegetate the area and seed the area. But then looking, oh yes, that's another view of the restored lagoons in phases 1 and 2 in good weather, coming along nicely. And then, but contrast to that, we've got areas in phases 6 that are completely unrestored. Effectively, they're bare colliery spoil with emerging vegetation. We've got some dangerous, unstable material and landform there as well. And so, in terms of the consultations, then we've had no objections or comments from the local community. Ashfield District Council are agreeable to continuing the reclamation works. There are no objections from any of the technical consultees, although There is an objection from the Nottinghamshire Wildlife Trust, and they believe that the works will continue to be disruptive to wildlife, and they would like more of the finished layout plan to be set aside for biodiversity. What falls to be considered in this case is the further time that is being sought permission for in which to complete those restoration works, and whether that will be sustainable for waste management and environmentally acceptable, including for ecology. The range of after uses, including the golf course, football pitches, camping, and there are also permission for 2 wind turbines. These benefit from full planning permission, and although there's no obligation to develop them within a certain timescales, and there are no changes being proposed to those aspects, it's not in scope to review those aspects. They have full planning permission. The applicant has calculated that an additional 148,000 cubic metres of materials will be required to complete the previously approved reclamation and the landform, and this is much less than was needed for phases 1, 2 and 3. However, the totals for the whole site are substantially above the original estimates back in 2013. This is firstly put down to advances in surveying methodology, and secondly, they did need additional materials to overcome the engineering difficulties in capping and reshaping the lagoons. The additional materials will not result in any change to the approved contours or landform. The waste core strategy provides support to restore colliery tips using waste where this cannot be recycled or recovered, and where its reuse would have environmental benefits. The site's acceptability for this has already been established, and there is a need for further material in order to finish off the site and thereafter enable the range of after uses to come forward. That will include new habitat areas, and there will be improvements to the local landscape through vegetating areas of colliery spoil. The overall development is considered to remain appropriate for this greenbelt location, and the approved landform and the wider development was previously adjudged as acceptable in landscape and visual terms. Given the limited time remaining within the extension that they are seeking, officers consider that the reclamation of phase 6 should now be prioritised before phases 4 and 5. The latter are already subject to previous restoration to some degree, whereas phase 6 is completely unrestored. Condition 21 is therefore recommended to be modified to bring forward phase 6. New conditions are also recommended to require an interim restoration to reflect the current practice on the site, and for annual site monitoring surveys. The Environment Agency have not objected, but have raised the prospect that the applicant may also need to vary their environmental permit. This poses a risk to the timely completion, but assuming this is overcome, the applicant has demonstrated an ability to source the materials that they have needed to date, and we do not see we do not see a shortage of available materials in which they need. On ecology, it is sensitive. We've had an updated environmental impact assessment with new surveys. There are great crested newts present across the site and in the water bodies, and it's an important population of great crested newts in the county, together with the adjacent Bentinck Void. There are also a number of breeding birds on site. However, the ecological assessment has concluded that with updated mitigation, including licences that may be needed from Natural England in respect of the great crested newts, there should be no residual harm to priority or protected species or habitats. And as I said earlier, new habitats are going to be developed on the site as part of the wider development. And it's notable that Natural England have not objected to the continuing restoration work, and neither has the council's natural environment manager. And that is subject to updating the mitigation, and that is a recommended planning condition. The comments from the Wildlife Trust have been considered. However, the plans for the site in terms of the layout and after uses have previously been approved, and the updated mitigation and management plan will provide the necessary means to protect and retain biodiversity in the long term. So officers have no other concerns in relation to traffic, noise, dust, landscape and visual, or in relation to HS2 safeguarded land, subject to conditions and other controls being carried forward. Any temporary impacts are considered to be justifiable in order to realise the long-term environmental and social economic benefits. And if more time was to be refused, this would directly affect the ability to deliver the end uses, including the community uses, the sport uses. Planning conditions regulate the full range of matters relating to undertaking the development and the operation of the after uses, and these should be carried forward with some minor updates to reflect the approved details. It is therefore recommended that the variation to condition number 3 is granted, giving until the 7th of March 2024 in which to complete the initial reclamation works, and by prioritising phase 6 via an amendment to condition 21. And these and other updates to conditions are set out for approval in Appendix 1 of the report. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We don't have any guest speakers on this, so we can go straight into a discussion, debate and decision. I've already got one hand up, Councillor Fielding, and then Councillor Owen. So Councillor Watson. So Councillor Field first.
Thank you, Chair. I do recall this site coming to planning on previous occasions, and I'm so pleased that the Great Preston youths are still present. Is there going to be sufficient time, even prioritising the area, for them to have reclaimed that Area 6? Or are we likely to be receiving another application for an extension of time?
Thank you. I suspect that's a question going through a lot of our minds, in actual fact, because between now and 2024 isn't long, is it? So, but Mr. Marshall can explain the background and what you think, please.
It's a big site. There's a lot of work to do. They use a lot of big equipment, and they can do work quite quickly if they can get on with it. The risks are things like getting the licenses that they may need for newts. Further risk may be that the Environment Agency intervene and say that they need to do further work for their permits. If they can be overcome, then they can get going. They have no shortage of material. They can get the material. They have some already stockpiled ready. So I think there is a good chance that they could complete phase 6 within the time. It's then whether they finish 4 and 5 off. However, the works in 4 and 5 are less critical in terms of generally improving the appearance of the site. They are more linked to the delivery of the golf course. So if they, for example, if they were to complete phase 6 and then run out of time, clearly if they wanted to complete 4 and 5, they would then have to come back for another application, or we could have further review of the site at that point. But given the state of phase 6 being the by far the worst visual appearance of the site, and it's unsafe as well. That is why we're recommending that the work proceeds to that phase next rather than 4 and 5.
Thank you. And I presume as well that the date that we're talking about, it's the applicant who has come up with that date. Just to clarify that. Yes, it is. Yeah. Is that helpful?
Yes, thank you very much for that.
Thank you. Councillor Owen, please.
We're making heavy weather of this, aren't we? Goodness me. They've got a planning permission in place. They're coming back for an extension of 14 months. For goodness sake, let them get on with it. And if Natural England don't issue the necessary permits and they have to come back for a further extension, we'll give them a further extension. There are great crested newts. Every time there's a planning application, great crested newts appear. I don't know how they can be regarded as an endangered species because they're everywhere. For goodness sake, put it to the vote, Chairman. Let's get it through and let me get on with it.
I will put it to the vote, Councillor Owen, but members have a right and a wish to speak on this item, so and they shall do. But your point is noted. The power of newts. Councillor Moxham.
Thank you. I'm not sure how to follow that one. Yeah. So, I mean, Councillor Field has already asked the main question that I had. Just a slight follow-up to that, and just for my clarification, and I've got another quick question, if I may. They're not anticipating the golf course to be finished by next March, are they? It's the works up to that, basically. Okay. You nod with sort of, that's... Go on.
Yeah, just to clarify, the time limit applies to the initial reclamation works, that is the importation of the waste and creating the final landform. That was because, as I say, there was a need to do those works and get on with those works, and that was why the condition was applied. The actual then delivery of the full range of sporting uses, the golf course, football pitches, there's no time limit on when they need to be achieved by, and as any planning permission, you know, it's up to the applicant as and when they want to bring them forward. So the first work is getting the site safe, restored, and then those after uses can follow on.
Do you want to come back?
Yeah, no, thank you for that. Thank you for that clarification. The other question I got is more a general question, just something that came into my head while you were going through it. The pictures that you showed in the presentation were great and helped me visualise the site a lot better. And I wondered whether we could have those in the packs in future. I realise that they're not going to print very well, and maybe you don't send them in the print bit, but maybe you could send them as an attachment when it goes out, because seeing those pictures made it so much easier for me to visualise than just looking at an ordnance survey map. So, a bit of a feedback and a question, really.
Thank you for that. Yes, you want to reply?
I mean, the images, you know, they're helpful, aren't they, to everyone? And clearly they won't print very well in black and white, but we'll look at what we can do to help members appreciate some of these sites, which are huge for, you know, compared to district matters, as you know. So we'll look at that. Thank you.
And of course, all applications are published on the website, so the pictures, I'm sure, will be on the website, or could be on perhaps. Oh no. Well, yeah, we got it in hand, but there will be a way. But it's a good point. In fact, indeed, it's a very good point you make, because when we had the Councillor Creamer and I had the pre-agenda meeting, where we both said we want to see photographs on this application, because a line drawing is one thing, but you're quite right, photographs are very helpful indeed. Right, Councillor Henshaw, you indicated.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I'm mindful to go along with the recommendations. I mean, obviously, a major restoration like this will take some time, and obviously things happen during the process. I mean, we've actually been on site visits for instance, Ratchet Hill Quarry, which, and as the officer said, the equipment was there, the big earth movers and all the relevant equipment to actually change the site. And if they've got the relevant equipment in place and they've got the time to do it, you can make a massive change, and you can change an area that's virtually barren to an area that's got a wide range and vast biodiversity within it. So, in relation to giving them the time, yeah, I think we ought to give them the time to do it. In relation to the great crested newt, and I don't take it as a joke that we've got an endangered species that's on site, and if we put things in place that actually makes the situation worse for that endangered species, I think we should take it very seriously. As with anything, I mean, Councillor Camilleri and I, perhaps when we were kids, we used to go up to the ponds and catch our great crested newts and put them in little bowls under the sink in our houses, and those were the days. But I'm telling you now, you can't do that now because the species has declined. Now, I want to ask the officer this. When we do an environmental impact assessment in relation to the great crested newts, which everybody says are there and they are endangered, what happens? Does the bulldozers go in and just plough it over, and then we hope that the little newts will crawl back to the top? Or does somebody go around, collect all the little newts, and then put them somewhere safe? What is the process? Because I don't know. Do you know, Chair?
No,
I mean, it's very interesting, and I think we should be aware of the process. So anyway, I'm voting in favour of the recommendation.
Righty-ho, Councillor Henshaw. Well, yes, Councillor Owen has started something there, but that's not unusual. And the question you ask about the process is important because you're quite right. Great crested newts, although some people might talk lightly of them, you're quite right, they are a protected species, and we have to take the law and responsibility absolutely to heart. So, yes, could you just explain to us, Mr. Marshall, how it's done? Because I know an awful lot of time has gone into the ecological matters on this application.
Yeah. Obviously, there are processes that are well used in the industry, and they have to do they have to do it under license through Natural England, so they have to have proper ecologists employed. And what happens usually is that they would basically clear an area and hand move them to an area that's not being worked on the site. So that's why the phased approach is helpful on this approach, that there'd be room to move them out of harm's way, and then works and then can then progress in the affected area. So yeah, there are newts to work around. It is an important population, probably the most important population in Nottinghamshire of great crested newts, and I know the applicant is fully aware of this and their responsibilities on this, and the planning permission also recommends that the recommendation is that we're also recommending that the overarching ecological mitigation plan is updated as well. So that's one of the recommended conditions. So hopefully we're looking after the great crested newts.
Thank you. I hope that helps, Councillor Henshaw. That was helpful and interesting.
It does. I'd be more than willing to come on one of the expeditions to save the newts if I can volunteer. Thank you.
Absolutely. Councillor Camilleri.
Just for clarification, I never went catching great crested newts. However, I saw him having a few drinks out of Mansfield. I used to think you remind me of the newt, but I don't know which one it was. So there you go.
Well, that's fascinating. That's one of the things about this the committee, how strange bits of history about members can come out and history. Right. Okay. Enough frivolity. We need to get back to business. Yes. It's so. Are there any other comments, or shall we make a decision on this application? I think we've. Righty-ho. Well, we've got the recommendation in before us. Show of hands, all in favour. I think that's unanimous, but for record, no one against and no abstention. As Sybil said, and indeed Councillor Creamer as well, because we've been around quite a long time around here, I remember the application first coming in. I think it first came in around about 2011 when it first landed. And somewhere, I don't know where it is, but I remember the applicants had this as part of the application, the brochure, for want of a better word, the planning statement, really went into great detail about the vision for this site, and because something's got to be done with it, it's going to be there forever, and so I think good luck to them as they carry on moving towards the eventual restoration, because it will be good for the newts. It would be good for the ecology as a whole, but also very good for residents and users. Anyway, I'm digressing. We'll move on to the final item, which is the Development Management Progress Report. I'll move the recommendation, or do I need to move that? Yes, I do. No, we just need to have presented. So, Jonathan, Mr. Smith, you've been very patient. If you'd just like to present item 7, please.
This is the usual progress report, Chair, detailing applications that have been received and determined since last committee, and it also provides a schedule of matters, certainly planning matters, not rights of way matters, that are due to come before committee in the next couple of meetings. So happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have any questions on the on the forward plan? No. Okay. So thank you for that. So that is noted. So that's the final item on the agenda. We've had although only 2 items as such, they're important, but the right-of-way application was particularly detailed and understandably so, and I hope that everybody understands where we are with it, but we are where we are now. So with that in mind, I'll final items done. We'll close the meeting. It's 12:20. Thank you for your attendance and contributions. Thank you.